Welcome to The Array, the podcast dedicated to delivering AI clarity for the marketing community, presented by Jacquard. Every week, we'll discuss the latest developments in AI and MarTech with an informed and inspiring guest and unpack what it all means for today's enterprise marketers, from the new challenges we're discovering in real time to the opportunities that could be saving you precious time on the way to driving long-term love for your brand. My name is Toby Coulthard, Chief Product Officer of Jacquard, the AI brand messaging leader. And with me always, and this is the last episode of the series, Jasper, I'm just going to skip these ones. I don't even know what half of them mean.
Rager to my pager. What's going on there?
Rager to my pager and the GTA to my PTA, whatever the hell that means. It's Jasper Pye, the Chief Technology Officer at Jacquard. How you doing, Jasper?
Yeah, I'm really good. Feeling good about this one.
So I've actually got a question for you. Is how many Koenigsegg supercars does Sam Altman need to buy to convince us that he's not in it for the money?
I think one.
He's already got one.
Yeah. And I don't think he needs to buy any more. I think every time you buy a Koenigsegg, I can't even pronounce it. It's so it's so gratuitous. Every time you buy a supercar, I think you're pretty much in it for the money at that point.
I was looking at this article where he's in front of Congress saying that he doesn't care about the money, and meanwhile he's driving around Palo Alto in his supercar. And I just wanted to touch on a couple of things that I just thought was interesting that we should talk about before we kind of get into the main segment, given that our guest today is very much involved in the markets and investment and those kind of areas. Is that, what's your kind of opinion on OpenAI's kind of shift from this kind of non-profit state to kind of for-profit? I think it's interesting how, from what we can tell, Sam Altman's basically vacated his entire leadership team in this kind of, if you take a shot at the king, you better not miss kind of vibe, where I believe he's getting 7% equity in the business. Meanwhile, going to these Arab states and asking for, I think, $7 trillion to fund OpenAI's, or at least that's what was in the Wall Street Journal around what he's trying to raise. Meanwhile, Microsoft being this kind of player in OpenAI, this kind of ostensible investor, while also being their biggest sub-vendor, and it's this kind of acquisition in everything but name. And the last thing I'll add as the kind of context to this question is that, what's interesting about Stability. Stability is a company, and I say was or is because they were invested in, I believe, by Microsoft. And then everybody in Stability then joined Microsoft and kind of left it in this kind of, this shell of a business. I'm not exactly sure what point they're at, which is kind of this kind of acquiring these businesses, but maybe kind of getting around some antitrust position where they're not really acquiring them. They're just kind of controlling them like a puppet master. What's your kind of thoughts on all of that?
Maybe there was some sentiment at the beginning that that this was something that we were trying to do for the greater good of humanity, but I think I personally think that would have evaporated fairly quickly when they realized what they were onto from a technology perspective, and they started to realize the sort of how far-reaching the applications were, and inevitably, like funding this tech it's expensive, right? So you need to pay for it somehow, and there isn't infinite money to just kind of pay for people to continue to research this stuff. So I think it was an inevitability. So I do think that some of the personalities in this space are kind of giving it a bit of a bad name. Like at the end of the day, we want the average person to sort of trust this stuff, and like the whole thing with Scarlett Johansson and the voice from her, like either that was just like a really weird joke or it was like really tone deaf. I don't know what they were kind of thinking with that, but I think there's a sort of like there's a personality component with it, and not just Sam. There's a number of people in this space, and I think they're not helping. Like we're trying to adjust to what is quite a significant shift in the way we think about doing a lot of things in our life. And then we've got these slightly crazy people that are like kind of like not sort of helping us on that pathway. And I feel like everyone needs a little bit more reassurance, a little bit.
I think It's just I know in the last episode we discussed kind of Mark Zuckerberg's kind of parallels with his kind of Caesarian Roman imperialist quotes that he's putting on his t-shirts. And then this kind of open AI coup that kind of occurred. It's kind of like these, it's kind of bizarre, these kind of parallels to your insane power politics, which is going on, that we're all just supposed to just watch and be exposed to and deal with. But
everyone
anyway,
just wants to change the world these days. Like, particularly,
I think everybody's just is power mad.
Like,
I mean, between Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and Sam Altman, it's kind of crazy. It's quite literally crazy.
Yeah.
So moving on to the main segment, our guest today is Lucy Colback, who writes on technology for the Financial Times. Before entering the world of tech journalism, Lucy was a fund manager and analyst for global financial institutions like Merrill Lynch, Bear Stearns, and Veritas. Basically, she's really good at doing the kind of deep research that cuts through the jargon and hype to identify the companies and technologies that deliver as promised. Welcome, Lucy. It's a pleasure to have you on the array. And given our conversation just before, I'd actually be interested in your thoughts on our kind of preamble there.
There is so much to say on what's going on in technology, and thank you for having me here, by the way. I think it's terrifying that a monopolistic environment has been allowed to develop in something that is so influential in technology, of all things. I mean, it permeates all our lives to an extent, I think, that was probably not envisaged even when the web came out and when email came out. And so the fact that these companies have been allowed to sort of, it's creep. And now they're so big, we almost don't know what to do with them, because of course it's good for the consumer, because they're so big. Like Amazon offers so much choice to the consumer, and it's true, but we're all chained into them. So the point that you make about power, it's terrifying that this industry, as I say, that is so influential, has become so monopolistic, and that these people are kind of godlike. You know, funnily enough, when you said Caesar for Mark Zuckerberg, I was thinking, yeah, he does kind of have the curly hair. That is rather how I would see Caesar, actually.
It's the rebrand, right?
Yeah, totally.
Zuckerberg remixed.
Well, who knows? Maybe he is Caesar reborn. But to your point about stability and Microsoft, you know, I think a lot of these takeovers tend to leave companies, pardon the pun, in a state of great instability. And I think that's where we see some of the startups, some of the new joiners. What's worrying is that they could do something really impressive and helpful by themselves. And that's probably where they start out. And then they just get absorbed and they get taken out by the monsters. And it essentially means that the monsters have a monopoly even in the new areas where you could have seen some great multiple flourishing of different competitors, and they absorb it instantly. It's a trick that, you know, is quite common in Asian markets. Their habit is to take out suppliers, competitors, startups, anyone with anything promising that could compete with them in the future.
It's kind of the interesting point about creep, and it's kind of boiled frog syndrome, where over time we kind of don't notice it, and then suddenly the only place we go and shop is Amazon, and the only place we use our computers is Apple, and there's no other choice. So before we get started, we actually want to try something a little different today. Lucy, given that you're an actual journalist, it seems only right that we kind of let you take the lead and ask us questions. So we're actually going to pass it over to you for this episode, and fire away.
Well, thanks so much. I feel very excited. Speaking of power, I'm in the control seat. So I know what we really want to achieve here is sort of helping companies to understand how they can move forward with AI. Just a little bit of background. I find where we are right now amazing, because as recently as 2020, I wrote a piece for one of the FT forums about AI. And at the time, the experts with whom I was speaking, they all talked about, you know, AI is going to make a massive difference. Some of it was quite prescient, actually. The World Economic Forum said that they thought that 50% of workers were going to have to be retrained in some way to adopt and adapt AI, which back then probably seemed a bit ridiculous, like 2020. Yeah, you know, AI, it's around a bit, you know, maybe lawyers are using it for due diligence and they're doing word searches and they're going, oh, this works, this doesn't, you know, contract sort of consistency. And the one area where the experts said it's not really there yet is creativity. Mm-hmm. And now 4 years later, I know it's not perfect, but oh my God, it's making music. It's being Scarlett Johansson, to your point. It's writing in the fashion of whoever you want it to write in. It's just amazing where we've got to. So that's sort of the background as far as I'm concerned, is just the rapidity with which everything is changing. And it's terrifying for companies because they feel like they need to be on board and they don't know how. So this brings me to my first contextual question, which is many of the experts that, talk about technology and technology adoption, the consultants and so on, they all say, start with the problem, not with the technology, right? Identify what it is that you're trying to achieve and then adapt, find the technology that's going to work for you. So with AI, what should companies be looking to achieve in the marketing context?
There's kind of two parts to it. I think being relevant and being contextually relevant to an individual is really, really hard if you're trying to produce all of that content yourself. And so it feels to me now like we have an opportunity with this technology to actually achieve things that we've never been able to achieve before as human beings. And so I think that's like one real opportunity, is being able to come up with messaging which is actually more relevant to individuals at scale, without the need to just bring on legions of copywriters. I think the other thing is models are really good at picking up patterns and understanding patterns and being able to understand why things are working in a certain way, that in ways that we're not able to understand. And so I think the other opportunity is around effectiveness. And so if you write something, oftentimes you're kind of guessing when you think about kind of like producing creative content yourself. And I think there's an opportunity for brands to just be able to use technology to help them come up with more effective copy by understanding patterns in human behavior.
The problem you're trying to solve with AI is the same problem you've always had. And I think that it's customer lifetime value. It is brand affinity. It's the same problems you had in 2012 and in 2005 and in 1985 and in 1935. It's how can you be more effective at marketing? The advent of ChatGPT hasn't changed the problem. How we solve for that has changed a little bit. And that's, I think, exactly where Jasper's answer comes into. It's about doing things that humans weren't able to do and taking it from that approach. I think a lot of vendors take this, I would describe it as an oracle kind of approach, where you ask it a question and it gives you a very good answer, right? Or you give AI some part of your workflow, right? So how much of what I do today can I give to AI? 20%, 30%, so I don't have to do it. Makes my life easier. When I think that's really missing the point. That's the opposite of what using machines for what machines do best, which is scale and automation and doing things 1,000 times, rather than doing the one thing that you're doing that you don't want to do and take it off my hands. And so I think the way that I think about it is, how can we use AI to take human creativity? How can we use AI to take what we're doing today and multiply that by 10x, 100x, 1000x, rather than taking 10, 20% off of what I'm doing to do it for me? Because that is where you end up with the stuff that humans could never do, doing something 10,000 times over, looking at patterns and huge amounts of data, rather than just being like, can you write something for me? Can you do this so I don't have to do it? And I think that's the difference between solving something, which using AI to solve something that wasn't possible in the first place. And I think that's where the value ultimately is going to lie.
I don't like to play favourites, but I did prefer that answer. Thank you, Toby. Because a little bit, yeah, I'm sorry about that, Jasper, but a little bit of what you said made me think, oh my God, what it's basically trying to do is push all my buttons, right? It's doing stuff that copywriters and humans couldn't do before. And I'm thinking, it just wants me to buy stuff. I get a ton of stuff that says, hey, you looked at this table, how about this table? And I'm like, I mean, seriously, do you not think I might have bought that table somewhere else and now I'm not looking at tables anymore, I'm looking at chairs?
100%. Like, you still need to be you need to be creative. Like, ironically, I find myself in a CTO position, but I started my life as a designer. I've had quite a unique kind of career trajectory to get to this point. So I very much resonate with people who come from creative backgrounds. And I think like you can't just expect it to. We can't expect it to solve all of our problems overnight. And so the examples that you kind of just described is that for me is just an example of marketers just not being very smart about how they use technology to communicate with their customers. That's humans making mistakes right there.
A lot of people see this ability to produce lots of content now using generative AI as an opportunity to send more messages, right? When actually I think that's the wrong way of thinking about it. It gives you the opportunity to send the right message in the right way to the right person, and be able to pick that actually this person prefers to be communicated with a push notification. They don't read their emails, or that they much rather, see a bit of content in a certain place and not be bombarded with it. Both of those ways of doing it, sending everything all at once, everything everywhere all at once, or being very bespoke and being very intentional with the messages you send, require lots of content, and both can be solved through generative AI and content scalability and production.
So it's not a cure-all, it's not a panacea. And so then we come to the next obvious point, which you're addressing, but the human in the loop aspect. So you cannot just do this. You can't give it to the machines and say, go run with it. You've got to have input on the back end. And so how much input on the back end? It almost sounds like there has to be more input on the back end, because now we've got so much data coming in. It's like, well, we've got access to all of this. How much of this can be done automatically by the program that you buy, let's say, or by the the structure that you're using, and how much of it really still requires oversight, but it's a different kind of oversight that you need from the people who are managing these campaigns?
Exactly. I think it's very much the latter. It's a different kind of oversight. It's defining the guardrails to which the machine can operate. It's putting it in a box, and a large enough box that it can do the things it needs to do and learn from the patterns that it's learning from, and generate the right language that it needs to generate and deliver the right messages it needs to deliver, but not giving it this carte blanche, do everything you can possibly can. If you let these AI systems kind of just go completely wild, and you say that communicate with I'm a large brand and I want to communicate on an individualized basis to all of my customers. What you do is you lose a couple things. One is you start to lose a brand identity, right? If you're speaking to everybody in the way that they want to be spoken to, what does it mean to have a singular brand that, that represents you if you're everything to everyone? So what does it mean to be that? And then you start to lose brand affinity. People start to kind of actually go, like, are you just talking to me in the way that I want to be spoken to, and who are you? And so you kind of need to give it a leash, and maybe a long leash, depending on who you are, to say, actually, I do want to speak to you in a way that you want to be spoken to, but I want to give it a little bit of control so it's not just completely going off the rails, and it's giving this kind of semblance of unity in the way it's talking to its customers. But you kind of want to give it a little bit of both. You want to have control and you want it to be a bit more individualized. So it's a very long way of saying I think brands will have a different appetite of how big that box is and the guardrails. But it's not like you're going through every message and saying, that's right, that's correct, because you're not going to be able to do that, and you're limiting your ability to actually capitalize on the scale. But you also want to keep it in the right box and the right size for your brand to enable you to do it on your terms, so it doesn't go off piste.
There's no reason why you can't also apply that to the human creative process as well, right? Like, I know that I'm wildly inconsistent with the way I approach every day, and I'm sure if I was still producing creative assets, I'd be producing inconsistencies in there. So there's a world where it can kind of also just kind of help me along through that process, right? Like, in the same way that we can put guardrails in place to ensure that we stay within that the confines of that brand voice, which is really important to maintain. We can put guardrails on ourselves so that we are also consistent with the way we think about things. I've been doing this for a long time, and I know that, the way people respond to language and react to creativity is very visceral. Like they have a reaction to it. But it's not always consistent. the way they react one month is going to change a month after. And I'm not even just talking about the end consumer. I'm also talking about, the way brands produce their content. And so I think there's a world where if brand tone of voice is as important as we all believe it is, then there's a world where the technology can also help us to maintain that integrity of that brand voice.
I love that. So I'm thinking about the same question in a slightly different way, or a slightly more granular, for want of a better word, way, is if I am now a modern marketer and I am using products such as yours, obviously marketers always got a lot of data about how successful certain campaigns were, but they just didn't have the degree of data that they have now. And this is not to say, oh, it's so boring, but am I now looking at a lot more information about individuals, about groups of people, and having to sort of consider much more carefully how I deal with those, because I have so much more information on them. I mean, previously you could say, okay, fine, we put out this campaign and it worked because we made X amount of money, or X amount of people bought this thing, and blah, blah, blah. But now it's like, it worked because X amount of people bought this thing, but it didn't work fully because these people could have bought it if you put it in a slightly different way. So maybe if we we now got we got like maybe 6 degrees of information: the sales, the response, the type of person, the this, the this, the this. And now you have to think about all those different levels.
So I think with the traditional way of marketing is that you kind of, as you described, you start with a hypothesis, and the hypothesis is we're going to talk to this group and sell this product, or I want to communicate with this demographic, or this is our core demographic and we're going to try and sell them this or talk to them in this certain way. I think what AI has enabled customers or companies and brands to do now is not have to start with a hypothesis. And actually, and when I say AI, I mean just as much machine learning and neural networks as I do large language models. If anything, the former much more than the latter, where you don't have to start with the hypothesis. You collect the data, the AI makes the decision. It's not that it necessarily gives you a lot more data, although it does. It's the decisioning on top of that data that I think the value really provides. More data is objectively better, I think, but not if it means that you can't make a decision based on it. And so it's the decisioning that I think the AI actually allows you to do, and be a lot more confident in those decisions, and let the system make those decisions for you. This is the group you should communicate with. This is how you should speak to them. This is how they want to be spoken to. I think everything that we've talked about before about irrelevant messaging and the table that, is like the table that you bought and all that kind of stuff, that's just a bad decision based off the data. And I think the idea of what AI is, it's going to allow us to be a lot more relevant in how brands can communicate. And then consumers are happy, because they're getting messages that ultimately speak their language and is the way that they want to be spoken to. And so ideally, everyone's a winner.
How do you help the individuals within a company get over the line there? Who are the stakeholders that you have to get on board when you are trying to introduce a strategy that includes AI? And how do you do that?
I think creative people within companies are like the first people you want to get on board, because obviously they're the ones that are so apprehensive about this change. We always use the analogy, like, I started my career as a designer, and I very much learned how to be a designer in the Photoshop era. But if you go back, like even just 5 or 10 years before that, like there were still designers who were literally typesetting on boards. They were building advertising campaigns on boards. Everything was hand done. It's a beautiful craft, but overnight that whole thing just kind of literally transformed. And I think it's been an enabler, but definitely people needed to kind of like understand it, and it takes time to understand it. So I think it's really important that the first thing you do is put yourself in the other person's shoes as a technologist and actually understand like why they might be apprehensive, and bring them on the journey with you as to why it can help them, rather than necessarily talking about the benefits of it replacing aspects of what they do.
You have to tell people that now that something else is possible, and you have to convey that this can do something that maybe wasn't possible a few years ago, and you really have to sell them on it, or persuade them that maybe what they're doing is going to be disrupted and isn't going to be around for much longer, and that they need to act upon that.
Besides creatives, who are the other people within a company that you need to get on board for adopting this sort of technology? I mean, even presumably some areas, CTOs will need education as well and bringing on board.
People are trying to figure out how to get it into the stack. And people are trying to figure out how to get it into the stack in a way that's useful as well. And I think a little bit like what I was saying before, I think CTOs definitely will benefit from seeing other use cases of how it's being applied. Like I think there's some really unique use cases of it being applied. Even people in tech need to be brought on. Everyone kind of needs to come on this journey. In my team, we use AWS to do a lot of our hosting of our applications, and they are moving really quickly, and the engineers don't always keep up with how quickly companies like AWS move. And so they've got lots of new technology, which makes all of this stuff easier. And this is something that I've, even just today, we were talking about, like, we need to take stock and take time to go and look at these technologies and see if they actually help us to do what we're trying to do more quickly. So I think you definitely have to kind of encourage that behavior in the organization.
So I'm a little concerned about when there are areas where there's immediate value to a business, but that value ends up in this kind of consolidation, we can let people go now kind of way, rather than value to the end consumer.
And what I mean by that is we've all been in one of those customer service chats on with an airline or with something, and it's so frustrating, and you just want to talk to someone. And the reason they did that is because it provides a little bit of utility and you get to let go all your customer service team as a result. And that provides a much worse experience for the end consumer. I think businesses will have to judge the cost value relationship as it relates to what does that mean for that end consumer. And I worry that actually the experience in many ways can go down rather than this kind of promised panacea of everything's going to be better and individualized and personalized.
I think that's a really, really valuable point because, cost cutting, reorganization, profitability, all these things are well sought after by big companies trying to squeeze a little extra out of operations. And this is not what that should be used for. It should be used more. I'm just taking what you said and extrapolating it, potentially for enhancing the top line because you've increased your brand loyalty and you've
That's exactly
connected with your customers better. So this is not a cost-cutting exercise, people. This is a revenue-generating exercise.
Well, we have to also remember that the end consumer is the employee, right? Like companies have a responsibility to understand that just cost cutting and reducing workforce size doesn't really contribute to the economy in the long run, because those people need to have employment in order to be spending money, in order for the economy to be growing, in order for those companies to be growing. So we kind of have to be careful of that, where we kind of just consume ourselves.
Layoffs and profitability and productivity are all very well. But, there is a messaging aspect, which is also important. Even if your customer's not your employee, your customers don't necessarily like to see that kind of thing always. You might have made a win for you and your shareholders, but that could lose you some friends. It could lose you some fans because it's maybe not on your brand message, right? You made a point earlier, Jasper, about how fast the technology is moving, and I know that's been part of the conversation all the way along, but again, going back to the sort of core premise, which is how should companies that are getting into this technology for the first time be thinking about it? Why don't they just wait? Why not wait? It's all going to be different in 6 months' time anyway. Should I just be monitoring what's going on? And maybe there's nothing out there that works for me right now. So all of this comes down to what problem are you trying to solve and so on. But should I just wait?
I feel like saying to wait is kind of the same as saying to just use it. It's like just use it for the sake of using it, or just wait because we don't know where it's going to go. For me, they're the same answer. I think the answer has always got to be figure out what you want to achieve and figure out whether it's the right thing to help you achieve the thing that you want to achieve in a way that's better than what you would have done if you hadn't used it. That, for me, that's the simple answer.
It's the product adoption curve at the end of the day. There's value of being an early adopter, and there's value in being a laggard. Jasper's exactly right. Like, what's the problem you're trying to solve? The problem isn't we don't use AI, right? That's not a problem. The problem is what is our ability to communicate with our customers effectively, or to drive brand affinity. And if AI solves that problem, which we believe it does, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's for every business, right now.
So, Toby, as the product guy, what are the tweaks that you're making that make it better, more usable for your customers, and therefore, obviously, more successful in connecting with the clients?
We've been able to generate language for since 2015 or so, well before ChatGPT came along. And it's a different way of doing it, and it certainly doesn't have all the applications that ChatGPT has. But there's only so many permutations of a 10-word subject line that you can do, right? So it's a very specialized capability. ChatGPT or OpenAI or Anthropic or any of them is just another way of an input to our system, right? We think about it as this AI as this kind of raw material, and that we want to make glass, right? So we need to build the machinery that takes this raw material and processes it and provides far more value out of this raw input than if you were to just build a sandcastle, right? And so in my eyes, it's like, how can we take these inputs and provide greater value to the customer through automation? And then what are the areas that we can that kind of open up as a result of doing that? And the first thing is individualizing language to a person, right? There are so many ways of saying something, but the ways of saying it to you and to me may be very different, right? And so building a system that can take the ability to generate natural language and scaling it up is an easy win, I think, for us, and an easy win for our customers. And then we start to think about, okay, what are other areas where you can start to do that? And there's, we certainly think about things like imagery. How can you individualize images to make something more compelling? In the previous episode, we spoke to Scott Zalaznik, the ex-chief digital officer of Adidas, and we spoke about product descriptions. And so how can we use natural language so that things aren't generic and things aren't static and things aren't irrelevant, and that's kind of how we think about how can we add more value to brands and more value to the end consumer by going on the internet and not seeing what I would describe as irrelevant messaging, which is spam. I want to see my email inbox and go, love all that. I want to see the my push notification on my phone and go, every single one of those is really is exactly what I want to see. And so that's how we think about how can we make it more relevant for the consumer and better for brands. And it's kind of, in my eyes, a win-win. So that's how we think about what are the adjacencies and what we do about building this automated kind of tooling that enables more value on both sides of that fence.
I think the key is just like having a natural customer experience. So it's not necessarily over optimizing to my preferences, but like we both gave a similar example early on where it's like, you bought this, therefore why don't you buy this? And it's like those messages always just sound so awkward. And it's because if you know how they're being constructed, it's just through deterministic kind of rules and logic. And it's like, if the product equals this, then we're going to say this. And it's like, what about I gave the streaming example, the music streaming example. It's like, well, what about if you kind of equated the band that you're recommending me to the like brooding depth of Nick Cave or the scintillating pop of Taylor Swift? And it's like, all of a sudden that just feels more natural. And actually going back to this point about like being a creative and being working in the creative industry, like so much of marketing is so inherently limited, but because of the way we construct the messaging is like based on data logic, and then it just feels templated, and it doesn't feel natural. And I think just talking to people in a natural way is going to make them engage with your brand more. And I think that's kind of like where we're really focused on solving that problem.
Well, guys, thank you very much for being my, for being in the hot seat this week instead of being the ones who are asking the questions. I appreciate it. Sorry, I did play a little bit of favourites every now and again, but you were really game, and it's been a lot of fun and very informative talking to you both. So thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Lucy. So now we're going to move on to our kind of fun segment of the episode. This one's called Around Our World in 80 Seconds. The AI and technology space is moving faster than ever, and it can be hard to keep up. So we're going to go on a swift journey through the stories you may have missed, exploring the good, bad, and bizarre, and offering some too long didn't read perspective in a single word. So, Jasper, Lucy, I'm going to read the headlines from recent AI and tech stories, and you each need to give me one-word reactions as I kind of move through each of them.
And do they have to be clean words?
yeah. It's like
I don't think so. I think we've been.
No,
I don't know.
This is an adult podcast. We can.
Okay.
We can do what we
I
want.
might not be able to help myself.
So, without further ado, here we go. So, both of you need to be kind of quick off the mark here. Google to buy nuclear power for AI data centers in world's first deal.
Boom.
Wowzers.
Watch, can BBC reporter's AI clone fool his colleagues?
Probably.
Definitely.
AI tool that can do 81 years of detective work in 30 hours, trialed by police.
Finally.
Get a lot more. I was going to say. I did more than one word. Get a lot more done.
London Standard to feature AI written review by dead art critic Brian Sewell.
Fascinating.
Weird.
Terminator creator James Cameron joins board of AI company.
It's the Skynet thing. It's like
Beginning of the
but
end.
I can't think of one word.
I would just say Skynet if I were you.
Smart.
Apocalypse.
Smart.
Google paid $2.7 billion to get a single AI researcher back.
Lucky.
In the wrong job, I'd say.
Mad.
And companies building AI-powered tech are using your posts. Here's how to opt out.
Fuckers.
Yeah, we haven't used enough swear words in this segment.
Yeah. On that note, thank you guys. I think, Jasper, you're going to wrap us up.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lucy, for coming on the show. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Even though we were in the hot seat, I feel like, as always, it was a great conversation. So thank you for asking questions and being kind of gentle with us. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
That's the end of our first season. Thank you for listening and watching. The Array will be back soon to share more AI technology and marketing insights with another group of brilliant guests. In the meantime, please remember to like and subscribe to The Array wherever you enjoy your favourite podcasts. Additional thanks to our production partners at Itch Media and the team at Jacquard. Chief Marketing Officer Marissa Adlett, Creative Director Alejandro Santandrea, Senior Designer David Nolan, Brand Strategist Mariana Anchibia Engel, Production Coordinators Erin Hernandez and Verity Jennings, and Writer-Producer Peter Berg. Thanks. We'll see you next time.